get started. And I see we are recording. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rebecca Billings. I'm the Vice Chair for SAASC, otherwise known as the San Jose State University Society of American Archivists Student Chapter. We're very pleased to welcome Alex Cherian. He's the archivist for the Bay Area Television Archives. Alex has led the archive since moving to the United States, bringing more than 20 years of experience in media preservation, digitization, and access initiatives. His work spans news, film, documentary, and videotape archives within television and media production settings. Beyond traditional archival work, Alex also develops archive databases and web platforms, manages multiple news media collections, and oversees research projects for content creators. His professional collaborations include major clients such as CNN, HBO, and Netflix. He also works closely with San Francisco State students, helping them explore and access unique film and video resources. He's a published researcher and holds a master's degrees in film studies with film archiving and Shakespeare and Elizabethan culture. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Alex Cherian. Thank you, Alex, for being here today and for sharing your insight and experience with us. Tonight, we're going to I'll give you the floor for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up to everyone's questions, and we'll have a fun Ask an Archivist Q&A. So please.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for doing your research. You appear to know more about my career than I can remember. I'm going to begin briefly by asking three simple questions. Number one, why am I an archivist? Number two, why is an Englishman managing the Bay Area Television Archive? And perhaps most importantly, number three, is it better to regret something that you have done or to regret something that you haven't done? I'm going to come back to those questions after reviewing the last 22 years of my career in 5 minutes. So there will be plenty of time for Q&A. In 2003, I had my own home. I had a good job in customer relations. I had a good set of friends living in England, and I was very unhappy. I decided I needed to make a break to try and figure stuff out. So I took a post certificate in teaching English as a foreign language and moved to Australia to teach English as a foreign language. This was during the SARS outbreak, which made finding work difficult. Nevertheless, I got a job at a good academy. I also got private work. So it was all going very well. After a few months, I realized that despite that, teaching was not for me. I had to try it in order to find out. So I came back to England with my tail between my legs. And a friend recommended I read a book. It's called What Color is Your Parachute? I believe you can still find it. The basic premise is simple. For every person on the planet, there is one ideal job that can bring meaning to your life should you choose to seek it out. I committed to the process, and by the end of the book, it worked for me, and it told me I needed to be a film archivist. This was very interesting because I did not know what that was. I did a bit more research and found that dotted around the UK, there were regional film archives, and the nearest one to me was in Manchester. I offered to do some volunteering for them, and they gave me a film from 1902 in which a man is seen taking off in a balloon from the Preston Guildhall, and that's it. They wanted to talk about the film and had nothing more than that. I did a bunch of research. I found that once the guy, Percival Spencer, took off in a newspaper account, he had no way of controlling the balloon, so he drifted north 20 miles before crash landing in the town of Lancaster next to the Williamson Memorial. Give or take, on the exact spot, which 74 years later, I would speak my first word as a child, which was doggy. That might not sound like much, but to me, it was mind-blowing. I had found a very personal connection to this bit of research that I was doing on a dusty old film. And I was hooked. I did more volunteer work for them. They told me if I got a master's degree in film archiving, they might hire me. So I took a master's degree in film archiving at the University of Norwich and graduated. I did an internship while I was doing that in San Francisco with Francis Coppola at American Zoetrope. His archivist was restoring some film elements from the film Rumblefish. That was fantastic. And finished my degree and got my ideal job in Manchester, my hometown. To me, film is most effective when it hits people on a personal level. Quite often, the locality of the film can make it personal if you know the place. Also, the people in the film. Maybe it's family, maybe it's someone important to you. So I was doing my ideal job in a place which meant everything to me. However, while I was doing my internship at American Zoetrope, I was introduced to my wife, Melissa. And like an idiot or not, I fell completely in love. And 2 years later, despite doing my ideal job, I had to quit. And I came over to the US and started working at San Francisco State. I would emphasize that becoming a film archivist or an archivist, if you prefer, is the most disruptive thing I ever did with my life. And it involved a lot of sacrifice and a lot of soul searching and a lot of financial privation. So, to go back to the questions, why am I an archivist? I'm an archivist because I take history personally. Question number two, why is an Englishman managing the Bay Area Television Archive? That's because I fell in love with an American. Question number three, which is a paraphrase from the rock band The Butthole Surfers, is it better to regret something that you have done than to regret something you haven't done? I don't know. You're going to be making decisions which, whether you like it or not, are going to affect the rest of your life. I was very focused. I had a plan. I managed to achieve my goal, and then life took me away from it, just like that. Obviously, you have to acquire skills to become an archivist, digitization, metadata, all that sort of thing. But whenever you get the chance, try and take a breath because these are important decisions you're making. The film historian Kevin Brownlow told me that give or take, if you're lucky, you're going to have 30 years in your dream job. And I'm 20 years in already. Time passes really quickly. So if you can take a breather and ask yourself the more important questions, not whether you can afford something, not whether you think you're going to get credit to do this and that, but quite simply, do you want to do it? Why do you want to do it? How long do you think you're going to want to do it? Passion's really cool when you're changing careers and going after something you want. But speaking from personal experience, passion fades over time. And what you're left with is asking yourself whether or not you did the right thing. So, with that, in a nutshell, that's how I got here after 22 years. I'm hoping there's some juicy questions in the Q&A.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. We don't have degrees here that combine film and archiving. The Masters of Library and Information Services just focuses on libraries and archives all sort of together, and film seems very specific. It's so fascinating. Did you ever look into other types of archiving, or were you just really set on film being the format that appealed to you the most?
In the 1990s, I was studying a PhD in Shakespearean literature, and I wound up having to teach some Shakespearean tragedy. I had to teach Titus Andronicus to a group of very talented undergraduates who could not understand the concept of black comedy in a tragedy. People are having their hands chopped off, tongues ripped out, people are being raped. It's not funny, they told me, and quite right too. And I could not get the concept across until I sat down, thought about it, wheeled a TV and a video player into the room, and started playing a clip from Pulp Fiction. It's the scene where Bruce Willis has just escaped from the cellar, but instead of escaping, he starts looking at weapons with which to take his revenge. I paused it when he reached up for the samurai sword. Prior to that, people are being raped and there's lots of violence going on. When I paused it, everybody in the room was laughing. I raised my finger and I smiled at them, and they all got it. And then I realized I was doing the wrong job. And in less than a year, I quit my PhD. So for me, film was always a medium in which I wanted to work with. I didn't know at the time that I could link that to history, which is also deeply personal to me. And film archiving really was the ideal solution for what I wanted to do.
Absolutely. I really appreciate finding the meaning behind why we're becoming archivists, like why what each of us is seeking and how this job in whatever format is really going to provide that. But please, everyone, add your questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to make things up as I go along. I'm looking at the chat, and yes, we have interesting parallel about decisions and career changes and how that affects future research. Thank you. Okay. So anyone else have any particular questions? Otherwise, I will just keep going ahead. Um, the It sounds like you've fallen into the absolute perfect role in the Bay Area with the television archives. It's such a unique place. And if I understand correctly, you are a solo archivist there, or are there others?
So when I arrived in 2007, and I don't know if it's changed, but you're not allowed to earn money for the first 6 months. So for the first 3 months, I volunteered at a place called Oddball Films in San Francisco, full time for free. And then for the next 3 months, I approached San Francisco State. I'd been told they had a really fantastic news film archive there, and I wanted to help them out for free. They did their best to push me away. They said, "Oh, we can't pay you. You don't want to come and work here, and we don't use the archive anymore." It took a lot of work to get them to agree to let me volunteer full time for 3 months. At the end of which, I knew I wanted to work there, but they kept telling me that I couldn't. But then a project came along for which they needed a film archivist, and there I was. So I got my foot in the door by pure luck. In England, all the regional film archives receive modest but consistent funding, either from local government or even from the government. You would think, or I thought at the time with Hollywood and everything, that America would look after film even more. No, you don't. We don't. There are a handful of archives which are well funded, looking after regional film, but that's it. Everybody else is just making it up as they go along. And although we've been successful, I really am making it up as I go along.
It sounds like it was much more than luck. It was a lot of perseverance and making a space for what you wanted to do and then convincing them that that was the correct decision, which I think is something that a lot of archivists are going to face. There's not a job market in a lot of the ways that there are for other industries, and doing a lot of networking and cold calling, and or at least this is the impression that I'm getting, is like a good way to meet people and to convince them that they should hire you for projects that interest you, right?
Yeah, you do have to promote yourself. I'm conscious that I went through this process 20 years ago and things were very different then. But for my master's thesis, I came up with a proposal which required me to go and interview everybody who was running a regional film archive in the UK. The thesis was awful, but it got me the opportunity to meet everybody and say words to the effect of, "Hello, I'm not an idiot. Could you give me a job?" And it kind of got me a job. That sort of networking, self-promotion, I believe is necessary. It turned out that my working in customer relations has been very useful for me as an archivist because, with a few exceptions, regardless of the organization and the policies and protocols, you still have to work with people. I worked with people for whom 50% of them, they were angry when I started speaking to them in my old job. You need those skills. You need to be able to work with folks who don't share your vision. You need to be able to work with people who maybe, for whatever reason, don't want the assets in your archive to be preserved and certainly not made accessible. You can't just start shouting at them. You can't say you're wrong. You have to come up with ways to persuade them, be it through going above their head, be it through persistence. For me, it's rare that I meet someone who is more determined to do the wrong thing with regard to the film than I am determined to do the right thing. It does happen, but most of the time they're not, and they give up after a while. Uh, you need stamina.
Interesting. And communication skills. I think that's something that
Mm.
people don't think about a lot when they approach this degree or this line of work is the amount of communicating. I think a lot of people imagine an introvert in a basement. Let's see. We have a couple of questions. Besides the archives duty as a film archivist, do you participate in digital preservation? And if yes, what do you find is the best software to use?
Can I ask the questioner to clarify what they mean by digital preservation?
Certainly, you may ask. And while they are answering, I will go to the next question. We have someone else who would love to hear a little bit more about the collections and the current work that you're doing at the Bay Area Television Archives.
So, give or take, we've got about 6,000 hours of news film that local TV stations shot on location in the field. It's from the 1950s through to about 1980 when they stopped using film and moved over to shooting on video exclusively. The format is 16 millimeter film, and if it was a professional camera operator, the film typically looks very good. It was often thrown in cans and never used again, so it's not been projected, reused, so the film is usually in good condition. 16 millimeter film, if you scan it at 4K, the quality can be very good. It's how they produced The Walking Dead. They shot it on 16 millimeter film and then they digitized that over to video files and then edited using the video files. When we make screeners available online, there's over 300 hours of stuff streaming online now. Even though it's an MPEG-4 file, it looks really good, and people are quite often surprised. I get a lot of producers asking me to mess up the look of the film, add fake scratches, or this, that, and the other like that, and I tell them that's up to them. I don't futz with the film.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm stopping to read. Um, I've never worked with film, but it sounds like the process is take the actual film and scan it with a digital scanner into an MPEG file and then utilize that.
Uh, Maybe.
I'm envisioning a physical scanner, but maybe it's something, a combination of software and hardware.
So maybe this will answer the earlier question about digitization. So I inspect, clean, and repair the physical 16 millimeter film, and then that gets put onto our film scanner. This is a laser graphics scan station. The film scanner has its own internal hardware and also software. I use the scanner to scan the film at 24 frames per second. I can scan it full frame, which is the whole thing, at 5K, or I can, pardon me, overscan at 5K, or I can scan it at 4K. The output that we use is an Apple ProRes 444 file. It's a good quality file from which you can render to things like MPEG-4 for screeners and whatnot. In an ideal world, we would scan from the film directly to a DPX file, but those files are huge and I don't have the capacity to back up thousands of terabytes. Whereas with the ProRes 444, it's a happy compromise.
Great. Thank you very much. Um, let's see. Another question came in. What's one of your favorite things that you've worked with and archived?
So, like I said, I always prefer it, or I get excited when working with the film becomes personal, even if it's not technically personal to me. In 2021, during the lockdown, I got a phone call from someone who asked if we had a film called The Adopted Child, which was produced by Cron TV, I think in 1965. I lit up because I knew that we did have that film. We had that film because in 2012, an intern and I were digging around in the Cron vaults, and for some reason, I couldn't make their compact shelving work properly. And the intern ran behind the compact shelving and realized that there were boxes of film preventing the compact shelving from closing. And in those boxes, which I would have missed, amongst other things, was the adopted child. The woman who was calling me is the adopted child who is featured in that
Oh,
film.
wow.
And she was literally an infant when they filmed it. And she knows she was adopted and she spoke to her parents before they passed. But since it was broadcast in 65, no one had seen the film, including her. So I scanned it in 4K. I told Cron what I was doing, and they wound up interviewing her and doing a report on it. But from her point of view, the film shows some very intimate scenes of them meeting their daughter at the adoption agency for the first time and clearly falling in love with her, and also explaining to the camera why they were doing this. And even for someone who's not involved, it's a beautiful thing. But for the woman, it completely blew her away. And time again, in different ways, our material is important to people either because it's their family or their community or it speaks to them. And I get to be the person who puts them in touch with that history. And whether or not it winds up being on TV or in a show or it's just between me and them, it's really rewarding. And once you've done it, even though there's a heck of a lot of work involved, if the reward pays off all of that work, then you know you're doing the right thing.
That's incredible. Yes, I had a lot of fun looking at the website because I grew up in the Bay Area, so it's the TV from my youth. Go back and see these things from another time. Um, do you have a huge backlog of materials? Do you get to exercise choice? I was thinking about you digitizing this film and making it available, but are there a lot of things waiting for attention and you get to decide what's prioritized, or maybe not you personally, but also in along with the priorities of this, SF state and whatnot?
Mhm. So give or take, we digitized about 5% of the collections. I keep saying we, I should say I. I've digitized 5% of the collections. I'll maybe be here for another 10 years tops. So you can do the math on that. The only way that all of the collections or a sizable chunk of the collections are going to get digitized is if we have more members of staff. But in the CSU current climate and previously, it's really not an option. We're not a research university. So the other thing that often drives what gets digitized is money. San Francisco State pays my wages, but the television archive has no budget. I have to raise the money myself in order to do the work. So I often have to work on commercial projects, HBO, CNN. Give or take, we work with about 50 documentaries per year, and they pay handsomely for that work. So there are times when I'm digitizing stuff, it's all valid and it all gets to be publicly accessible, but it's not necessarily what I would choose to digitize based on the mission of San Francisco State or based even on the community. But that's a reality, and I have no way around that. Some people would call it ambulance chasing, and to a degree it is. But as an archivist, one of the things you might have to do is be a hustler. And my dad was a hustler, and I learned a lot of useful things from him, and I brought them all to bear when I've been working at this archive. You have to get things done by hook or by crook, and depending on how much oversight you have, if you work on your own, it gives you a bit more freedom to make those decisions. The downside is you don't have the financial support, and at times it's a difficult thing.
Absolutely. It sounds like it requires a lot of creativity and initiative to balance the things that you'd like to work on with the realities of funding. It sounds like that's a constant process. Congratulations to you for having the option of having big corporate clients, but then also being able to spend time doing the work that you really find meaningful. And you work with students on top of that. It sounds like you're a busy, busy man. I'd love to hear more about what you do with the students.
So right now I'm working with our associated student who found the archetypal stinky old box of film in our Richard Oakes Multicultural Centre recently, and they gave me the box, assuming there was nothing in it worth having, but they wanted to check. It turns out that box contained the raw film elements that were shot by a man called Joe Brewer. Joe Brewer was a local psychotherapist who in 1970 was allowed on to Alcatraz by the Native Americans who were occupying the rock at the time to shoot film for a documentary. One or two bits of that film have surfaced over the years, but not much of it. And what I'm working on right now for the associated students is the raw footage. There's some beautiful film. He shot a lot of images of Native American women on the rock. And while we have a lot of footage shot by the TV stations on the rock, they were always chaperoned by the Native Americans. And quite often they wound up speaking, the middle-aged white dudes from the TV station wound up speaking to the men of the Native Americans because that's just how it was. Whereas this footage, it features a lot of women and a lot of children, and it's going to offer very different visual perspectives, which would match the written history about the occupation of Alcatraz. They've apparently just found three more of these stinky boxes, so that's really exciting.
That is exciting. Okay, we have a few more questions that have come in. Let's see. How do you shelve 16 millimeter film and protect the film for pests, mold, humidity, etc.?
Thank you for the question. So, the basic way to store film on a shelf is horizontally. You lay it flat. The film, when it's wound around a film core, is basically a pancake. And if you store it vertically to maybe maximize the shelving space, you're putting the pressure of gravity onto that film. So you do not want to do that. You need to house the film in ideally an inert polypropylene can so it doesn't react to the film. The film is always venting chemicals. The It's called vinegar syndrome. That's the nickname for it. It's acetic acid. And if you keep a film in a can, a metal can, the metal reacts with those chemicals and it increases the rate at which the film deteriorates. So these vented cans, they have little holes in the side and around the bottom, so it lets these gases vent. Ideally, you should check the acid content of the film using paper tests every couple of years. And there are different levels of temperature and humidity for different types of film to optimize the longevity of the film. But the fact of the matter is, all of the film is going to wind up in the soup sooner or later. And the quicker you manage to scan it, the better the type of picture, the digital picture that you're going to be preserving for the future. We are not doing all of that optimally because we can't afford to, but we're doing some of it.
That's great. And you answered the following question. Someone actually asked, how do you deal with films that have vinegar syndrome? So, yeah, something that's very familiar.
Ideally, you put them in a vault on their own. Good film archives have a vinegar vault.
Oh,
The thing about vinegar syndrome is, while there's no definitive proof, people who've been working with the films for a long time strongly suspect that the gases which are venting from the vinegar films, which are really just film which are in a more advanced state of deterioration, it reacts with films which are more stable and accelerates their deterioration. So you really need to keep them separate. Uh, and that's not something we can do. if I find a Vinegar Syndrome film now, if I can scan it, I'll scan it. If not, then I can't keep it.
Interesting. Interesting. Such great stories. Okay, we have more questions. Is it possible to view the adoptive child online? They love the
Yes.
story. That's an amazing story. Is that a yes? I'm sorry.
It is, and sorry, I'm not Mr. Supercool Zoom fluent, but what I'll do is I'll stick a link in the chat now because I
That'd be
can't remember where
fantastic.
it is. Yeah, there it is.
Great, thank you. The next question is, can someone who's not experienced with handiwork learn to handle and work with film? I guess maybe that's a question about how does someone gain experience from being a complete novice and who's never worked with film before? Like, what is the process?
Film might initially seem more daunting than videotape because a tape is an object. Unless you're opening up the casing and getting into the magnetic media, people aren't too worried about picking up a videotape. Whereas a film, if you pick up the film pancake, uh, you're stepping into a world of possibilities. Just before I had a visitor from the San Francisco Public Library on Monday, I was working with a film which was so warped, it popped off the film scanner while I was scanning it, which has never happened to me before. This film had a life of its own. It was like wrestling with an animal that did not want to be put back around the film. It was awful. So I could hand a student a film and say, okay, we're going to get some practice handling film. I'm going to give them a stable film. I'm going to explain the basics, which are simply point A to point B to point A, rewind, fast forward. As long as you maintain tension on the film, that's the basic. There are always films which are exceptions to that rule. So, in the same way that you could put someone in a car, give them the basics and teach them how to drive, you wouldn't put them in a film and ask them to drive in a car chase the week after that because they'd die. Uh, what you'll find with working with film is if you ever get into it, there's a heck of a lot of work involved, hours of work sometimes, if you're unlucky, in yielding 3 or 4 minutes of video once you've scanned it. On the plus side, you will find very quickly whether or not this is the type of work you want to pursue. When I do it, I don't enjoy the nitty gritty and the it can be really repetitive after a while, especially when you know what you're doing. But the payoff is always there for me. I know some people who've given up on it because after a while, it's not worth it to them. And the only way you can find that out is by trying it for yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. Um, I had missed a question earlier, and the question is, are there any professional affiliations or associations that an aspiring film archivist should be familiar with?
Yes, in North America, the Association of Moving Image Archivists, AMIA, they have an annual conference, which this year I think is in Baltimore. I might be wrong about that. In November or maybe December. That is, I guess, the more democratic version of an association. If you work for an archive which has money and staff and can meet a bunch of much more uh, strict criteria, you can join FIAF, FIAF. Uh, there's a lot of European film archives in FIAF and a handful of US archives. I've never been because I definitely don't meet that criteria.
Okay, thank you. I knew as soon as you mentioned internships, we were going to get a question about it. And the next one up is, are you set up to accept remote volunteers? I guess that's not internships, that's volunteers, but I'm sure people would be interested in you speaking to either volunteer positions or internships.
Potentially, yes. The most successful internships that I've worked with have always been from people who have approached me. with an idea. In the first intern who did that approached me with an idea. We have a lot of Black Panther material from the Oakland chapter. It's give or take, it's our material which gets used the most in documentaries. It's iconic history, and it translates well to the camera. She approached me and said she wanted to try and find as many films that hadn't been digitized that featured women in the Black Panther Party. And I was like, yes, yeah, go for it. And I cut her a lot of
So
slack and
cool.
worked with her. Uh, a lot of the stuff you can view online. If someone approaches me, bearing in mind I'm the only member of staff and says they're interested in film archives, can they be an intern? I'm probably going to direct them to an archive that has more members of staff and more resources. If they've done their homework, if they know some of the material that we have and they ask me an informed collection because they're interested in doing something, I can't guarantee that I'll work with them, but I'm definitely going to give a lot more consideration to try and make that happen.
Fair enough. That sounds like such an exciting project. And we can post a link to the Bay Area Television Archives website, which has your contact information. And maybe that would give people enough ideas to research ahead of time and think about it. And if they feel so driven, approach you with an idea. But understood, you're one person and you can only do so much.
It, even if it's not possible, I know a lot of people within the industry, but both in academic libraries and also further afield. It may well be I can refer them elsewhere if it's not possible. I like talking shop. I respect people who are interested in this sort of thing and have done a bit of homework. Uh, I don't provide the more collegial pastoral care that some students might get from, for instance, your MLIS program, because I don't have the time. So if you're approaching me saying, wow, this is cool, I'll say thanks a lot, but nothing's going to come from that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think that that's an entirely fair position to take as an individual. And also, just knowing that running internships is actually a lot of work for anyone who's never been on the other side. Let's see, we have another question. How do you handle films made of nitrate cellulose?
Good question.
And for
Uh,
those of us who don't know what that is, maybe you could explain.
so early film, pre 1951, I think, nitrate cellulose film. It's the transport medium that the film was made on from the late 19th century onwards. If you ever read a story about how a film caught fire in a projection booth and the entire building burnt down, it was nitrate cellulose. It's incredibly unstable. If it catches fire, a reel of it catches fire, and you're in an enclosed space, you're probably going to die and take the building with you. Uh, I'm smiling because a colleague of mine came to me earlier this month with a film which said on the film itself, nitrate cellulose. But it's very probable, based on my experience, that the nitrate film had been reprinted onto safety film, which is from 1951 onwards. It's a different form of film, and it's not as combustible. The way people try and test it is to cut off a little piece of the film, stick it in a trash can, get a long piece of bamboo with a match stuck to it, and like set fire to it. I did that in the in a museum in Liverpool in England with my boss at the time, and it was safety film, so we looked like a pair of ass hats. But I can't emphasize enough how dangerous it is. We had an old guy who was in the Polish army during World War II, who brought some film with us to the Northwest Film Archive, and he was asking what to do with it. And the reason he was finally giving it up is because he was keeping it in the shed in an old washing machine underwater, and it had exploded in his wife's face, and she'd had to go to the emergency room. Uh, There is no ideal way, unless you have a lot of resources, of dealing with nitrate film. You can go online and type in nitrate film, and you'll find one or two archives which are able to work with it. But even if we had the equipment and whatnot, I wouldn't work with it. I'm willing to do a lot of stuff with my job, but I'm not dying over a nitrate film. So you can maybe do some more research on that. It's very interesting.
Interesting, but high risk. Yeah, I could see why I
Oh
would
yeah,
not wish to
yeah,
do
it'll kill you.
that. Wow. Okay, well, that's a great question. Let's see. What or who are the biggest threats to film archives?
I'm going to give you a two-part answer here. One is based on experience, and one is based on my instinct for what's going to happen. I'm also going to turn the light on here. In the early 1980s and early 1990s, a lot of TV stations, without having spoken to each other, started to dump their film assets. This was because they were moving over to tape. The film took up a lot of room, and the people who were in charge of the film, which were typically custodians, because they were in warehouses and basements and whatnot, were complaining that the film was taking up too much room. Film often winds up in the hands of people who aren't interested in it. History often winds up in the hands of organizations who aren't historians. I mean, nearly all of our material is local TV news film. It is living history, but the TV stations are only concerned about staying afloat these days and surviving, but making the evening news. To expect them to also turn into a museum and an archive, as well as a struggling TV station, is untenable. Similarly, you wouldn't go down your local library and ask them to produce the 6 o'clock news. They might put something on the screen, but it would be awful. So film always winds up in the hands, give or take, of people who don't know what to do with it. Librarians, for instance, who don't have film archive training. And people don't like to step out of their comfort zone often. So the film winds up being an object, which, if you're lucky, sits in a vault in a nice film can on a shelf, but never gets touched because they don't know how to work with it. So that's how film can often die. It just gets neglected because people don't want to admit they don't know how to work with it. That's the first part of my answer. The second part of my answer is not naming any names, but for the first time, I saw our film being altered digitally using AI to help emphasize a particular narrative. I wouldn't have known it unless someone had pointed it out to me, but and it took me a while to figure out what they'd done. But that's just the first example of AI altering a primary historical resource. People come to us because they trust the medium. Quite often, there is no film of what they're looking for. Some people will do a reenactment, but if they're lucky, sometimes there is film. I see a lot of software now showing you give people an old photograph and the AI will make the photograph smile and move around a little bit, some kind of basic animation. That sort of thing is going to take off soon. And if people no longer trust archival film, then not only will false histories be pushed, but the source material which I found so rewarding and has allowed people to connect to their history in a personal way, it will be, I don't want to say corrupted, but it won't have the same connection anymore. It'll become so disposable that it'll just be a tool for fantasy. And as an old fart who's 53 years old, I think that's a real shame. And I worry what's going to happen because film in the possession of corporations is always monetized. It's not a historical object, it's a monetized asset. And it's expensive to preserve film, and there's only a certain amount of organizations who can do it. So that's a fairly negative look at what might happen. It provides a lot of instances for opportunities to discuss the ethics of how film and AI may or may not work together. But I personally have a lot of doubts about whether it'll be a positive experience.
Thank you. Thank you for your insight. I was wondering what your perspective was on AI and the questions on retaining the provenance and the authenticity of original records is definitely important, as well as recognizing that it takes a lot of finances to store and house records and archives properly. And if they don't understand what they have, it's going to be hard to argue for them to take care of it well.
Mhm.
Yes, good questions. Let's see. What is the best and worst part of your day-to-day work in the archives?
I'm going to sound like some kind of hokey old fart here, but honestly, the best part of the archive day for me is opening the door, going in there, turning on all the equipment, checking my gauges, listening to everything fire up because it's noisy, checking all the digital readouts and everything. For me, it's like being on that old style Star Trek Enterprise bridge. I like chunky switches. I like things that make noises when you press them. I have a lot of high-tech equipment which doesn't, but it's mixed up with the analog equipment. I don't know what's going to happen in that day, but I know I'm in the right place. And it's also very satisfying because every single stick of furniture and equipment in that room was acquired through the work that I do with the television archive. So there's a certain personal satisfaction as well. The worst part of the day, it's honestly when I have to leave.
That's the best answer. I love people who love their jobs. Let's see. The next question is, you mentioned taking on more commercial clients to fund the archives. They are curious on how those projects came to the archive. Was it through established connections, networking, etc.? I guess how did they find you? I guess they were maybe familiar with the content that you have. Not sure. You
We've been working with a lot of established production companies for over 15 years now. So, yes, there is a lot of repeat business and people talk, and that's a large part of it. But to give you one specific example, San Francisco in the 60s and 70s, for whatever reason, had more than its fair share of serial killers, the classic one being the Zodiac killer. Uh, that generated a lot of repeat business for us. I started looking into the history and just websites, San Francisco serial killers, and I found one or two serial killers who were in that particular field well known, but we've not digitized any material featuring these particular men. And so Edmund Kemper, for instance, who was bopping people off in the Santa Cruz area or in the early 1970s. He was a huge man, bonkers. Uh, I digitized a lot of that material and then I started pretty much cold calling production companies saying, hey, look at this, Edmund Kemper. And in less than 6 months, the same thing that was happening with the Zodiac happened with Edmund Kemper and then a couple of other serial killers. So I chased the business. You could say it was kind of a cynical way of making history available, but it's history. And once I digitize a film one time, if people keep coming back year after year with another version of Edmund Kemper, the serial killer, the video files are all there, and it's really easy for me to copy them and make them available to them for a fee. So it's a good way of me spending my time doing other stuff. So I chase the business when I can.
It sounds very much like you're a trend spotter, that you're getting in front of what people would be interested in and then making that connection. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on what's next, like what might be in those archives that would be a subject that people might be interested in next, or
There are less documentary films being made because it's becoming more expensive to use archival film, the licensing of it. It used to be like $1,000, $2,000 a minute. But as TV stations and networks are bought up by larger corporations who have less direct attachment to the material itself at all, it's costing more to license film. So what that means is, from my point of view as an archivist, increasingly I see particular subjects, places, times, such as in San Francisco. If someone's doing something about the counterculture and they want to use footage of quote unquote hippies, there are a series of images, usually shot by CBS in 1967, of young people dressed in tie-dye dancing around a bonfire in Golden Gate Park. The images keep getting used and reused. When I occasionally reach out to producers and say, I've just found this amazing film, uh, I found this film of a guy who got shot while he was having a sandwich in his car in San Francisco. It was an awful tragedy. It made the news, but it's amazing footage to show different aspects of crime and murder. There's hippies who were really intelligent and who were feeding people because they were suffering from acid burnout. Typically, they don't appear on camera because there's less people being given the opportunity to make a more diverse approach to a subject matter. There's always going to be independents that manage to break through that particular imaginative glass ceiling, but it's getting harder and harder for them. And when I can, I'll try and help them out. But ultimately, there's a financial firewall that's going up around the film. So if I was to answer your question, what do I think is going to happen? I think you're going to see more and more of the same-ish type images, and you're going to start seeing AI images which are either based on real footage and augmented or not even based on real footage at all.
oh, isn't that interesting? I had never even guessed at how much it would cost to use film footage. Is that something that you have any control over? Is that just completely set by the legal or marketing departments and determining the current price? Or it sounds like
The
you have some flexibility of working with people.
I have flexibility in what I charge them for the archive services.
Mhm.
So having a film digitized, having it uh, color corrected, having a particular type of scan made for them. The only time I have any kind of potential influence is when I can say to one of the copyright holders, we really support this project. And then it's up to them to use their discretion whether or not they want to give them a discount. The option of doing that when you get to the material which is owned by corporations, that no longer exists. Uh, Last year, we brought in what survives of the KNTV news film collection from the 60s and the 70s, which was in the possession of History San Jose, but they donated it to us, and we own the copyright for that. So, as more of that collection gets digitized and made available online, and you can already see parts of it through the California Revealed project, who scanned films for History San Jose. I will be able to have a direct say in who pays what. CNN can potentially pay a lot, and a local filmmaker could potentially pay nothing. It really just depends. But it's rare that a film collection comes with the copyright.
Copyrights are such an interesting subject. Yes, that obviously impacts what you're able to do with it and how you can charge. We have just a few minutes left. There are a couple more questions and we'll get through them. Let's see. Do you ever work with the Internet Archive, another local resource that pretty much everyone should be aware of here?
I have occasion to hobnob and discuss shop with Rick Prallinger, who's associated with the Internet Archive. But the Internet Archive is more focused on more current material and it's a lot more ambitious. The basic idea they have, which is wanting to make everything available to everyone for free, I'm 100% bought into that idea. But in terms of what we do at the television archive, because we have to work with copyright holders, it doesn't give me the same flexibility to be able to do that. And also, although technically San Francisco State does have lawyers, I've always been very careful not to require lawyers in the work I do because if the university thinks that what I'm doing is potentially exposing them to financial risk, we'll quietly get shut down, I'm sure.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's see. Do you have an online database that is cross-categorized that lets people know what is in the archive that has not been digitized?
It's not perfect and is going to be getting a few upgrades, but yes, we do.
Oh,
I'll
fantastic.
I'll put a link into the chat.
Thank you. That'll be fun to take a look at.
It's a Drupal database, and I would emphasize that the original records from the TV stations were used to produce the original film record. Quite often, the detail can be lacking, so you're going to find hundreds of items which are just titled Reagan. They do typically have a date though, which means you can usually figure out what might be on the film. Until I digitize a film and I can actually watch the thing, you're not really going to find good records, but it does distinguish between what has been digitized and what hasn't. Just put it up there.
Thank you so much. All right. I know we all love a good online database. We are just about at the hour. Any last minute, last call for questions? Pause. All right. Well, thank you so much, Alex. This has been really interesting and engaging. I learned so much about the local television archives that I had no idea. And also, your work as an archivist is so interesting. You do your, what do they call it? You wear all the hats. You do many, many different types of things. And I think that's a very realistic portrait of what a lot of archivist jobs are going to entail that combines work that you love, work that's for funding, work with students, all of the above. But I really appreciate your enthusiasm and the things that you've shared with us today.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And we are recording this and we will make the recording available. There will be a notification sent out to everyone who's attending and just everyone who signed up and will eventually be on our YouTube channel. Thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. Please keep an eye out for our next Archivist Spotlight, which will be coming up on November 6th. We'll be speaking with Ashlyn Velt. She's a senior archivist and author from the University of Colorado. So thanks, and everyone have a good day.